Today is Thursday, June 13th. We're talking about why there's so much conflict on Capitol Hill over just one question, and why Amanda Knox is going back to Italy for the first time since she was released from prison. Plus, who won the Stanley Cup and where food delivery by drone is coming this summer. Then hang out after the news for Thing to Know Thursday's bonus interview. Welcome to The Newsworthy. All the day's news in less than 10 minutes. Fast, fair, fun, and on the go. I'm Erica Mandy. Thanks so much for being here. You ready? Let's do this. More conflict between House Democrats and the Trump administration, but this time it has nothing to do with the Russia investigation or the Mueller report. Instead, it has to do with the decision to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census. The House Oversight Committee voted to hold both Attorney General William Barr and Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross in contempt of Congress. The Hill reports House Democrats say the men will not hand over documents that could show why the Trump administration wants to add that question to the census. In fact, President Trump used his executive privilege to block Congress from seeing the documents. We've talked about this citizenship question before. The census, of course, is the survey that goes out every 10 years to better understand America's population. And this controversial question that could be added to it would ask, are you an American citizen or not? Well, President Trump has called it a common sense question, and other supporters of adding the question say it will help enforce the Voting Rights Act, which outlaws racial discrimination in voting. But critics say there's no evidence that adding that question would help enforce anything. They're also concerned the question will stop illegal immigrants from filling out the census at all and make the whole thing less accurate. Whatever's decided matters. The census is used for things like deciding where to send government money and how congressional districts should be drawn. So the House committee is worried there's an alternative motive here, and they want those documents to find out. For now, the contempt vote goes to the full House next for another vote. And by the way, separately, the U.S. Supreme Court is also looking at this issue, and a final ruling about that question is expected by the end of the month. Stay tuned. More intense protests happening in Hong Kong. In fact, officials are now referring to them as riots. Hundreds of thousands of people are protesting an extradition bill. If passed, the bill would mean people accused of certain crimes could be transferred to mainland China to stand trial. Remember, the relationship between Hong Kong and China is summed up as one country, two systems. That means Hong Kong has its own government and legal system. Well, Hong Kong's legislature was supposed to review the bill yesterday, but the mass protests delayed that process. And now the BBC reports riot police are using rubber bullets, beanbag rounds, and tear gas to try and stop the crowd, hurting dozens of people. Reuters reports it's some of the worst violence the city has seen in years. Despite all that, Hong Kong's leader says they'll still push the extradition bill forward, and it will likely pass. Amanda Knox will be back in Italy today for the first time since she was freed from prison there. She said in the past she would never return, but now Inside Edition reports she's agreed to speak at a criminal justice festival about wrongful convictions. In 2009, Knox, an American, was convicted of killing her roommate while studying abroad in Italy. She spent years in prison, but was freed after an appeal. Knox admits she's nervous to return to the country, but she'll talk about the role of media in trials and help out the Innocence Project in the country. Her trial drew international media attention, and the AP reports the very public allegations against her likely affected her initial verdict. Even as states legalize marijuana, it's mostly still up to employers whether or not they hire someone who fails a pot test. Well, that could be changing. Nevada just became the first state to pass a law that bans employers from not hiring someone based on a positive marijuana test. It's set to take effect in January 2020. But CNN reports there are some exceptions. The law does not apply to people in public safety jobs like firefighters and EMTs, and jobs like truck drivers, where you have to be behind the wheel. Recreational marijuana is already considered legal in Nevada, and the governor there says because the legal cannabis industry is thriving, it was important to pass this bill. New York City did pass something similar as well, but Nevada is the first state to give the okay. Researchers are one step closer to helping people improve their memories. Bloomberg reports brain implants may be the solution. Researchers have tested them and they're apparently working. An agency within the Department of Defense has spent nearly $80 million to make devices that help restore the memories of people with traumatic brain injuries. Basically, implants would work to measure electrical signals in the brain. If the brain has little activity, the device will provide a zap to strengthen the signal and increase the chance of forming a memory. In 2 separate studies, researchers found the implants boosted memory by as much as 37%. So far, the tool has only been tested on patients with epilepsy, but experts say the future is promising. Much more news ahead, but first, today's sponsor is Babbel. It's a language learning app that will get you speaking a new language with confidence. I think it's important to learn another language because it helps you connect with that culture, especially while you're traveling. And bonus, it's got to be good for your brain. I love that Babbel makes it so easy to get started and to stick with it. Lessons are broken up into just 10 to 15 minutes, so it's not overwhelming, and you can take the lessons on any device. Babbel is also designed to quickly get you speaking your new language within weeks. And Babbel's teaching method has been proven effective across multiple studies, so they know what they're doing. In fact, it's the #1 selling language learning app in the world. So what are you waiting for? Give it a try. And right now, you can try it for free. Just go to Babbel.com or download the app to try it for free. That's Babbel, Babbel.com, Babbel.com, or download the app to try Babbel for free and start speaking that new language with confidence. All right, now back to the news. For the first time in the team's history, the St. Louis Blues are the Stanley Cup champions. They beat the Boston Bruins 4-1 in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup final. And as the St. Louis Post-Dispatch puts it, they did it in an unprecedented way, coming back from having the fewest points at the start of the year to being a dominant team. Will there be another championship team tonight? It's Game 6 in the NBA Finals, and if the Toronto Raptors beat the Golden State Warriors, they too will take their first title in franchise history. Or will the defending champs take it to the tiebreaker in Game 7? You can catch tonight's game on ABC at 8 p.m. Eastern. And one more thing in sports, this time in golf, the U.S. Open Championship starts today. All eyes will be on world #1 Brooks Koepka. CBS Sports reports he's looking to win his 3rd straight U.S. Open. E-scooter startup Bird just bought one of its rivals. Business Insider says it bought Scoot, which is one of only 2 scooter rental companies allowed to run in San Francisco. The Verge says because of those city rules, Scoot will still operate under its own brand name, even though it's now owned by Bird. The companies say over the next few months, they'll offer Bird-built Scoots in many more cities. Uber Eats delivery by drone is coming as soon as this summer. Bloomberg says Uber is testing the new delivery method in San Diego, California first. And one of the early partners is McDonald's. But don't expect Big Macs to be dropping from the sky, at least not yet. Here's how it'll work. TechCrunch says restaurants will prepare the order and load it into a drone. The drone will then fly and land at designated safe landing zones. Then an Uber Eats delivery driver will pick up the food and finish the last leg of the delivery to your door. Even with those extra steps, Engadget says drone delivery is still expected to be faster. For a 1.5-mile trip, a drone will deliver food in 7 minutes versus 20 minutes by car. As far as pricing, it is expected to cost the same as Uber Eats delivery today. All right, that's it for the main news today, but it's now time for Thing to Know Thursday, where a different expert explains a different thing to know only on Thursdays after the news. This week, we're talking about the opioid epidemic in the U.S. What are opioids? Why are there so many overdose deaths? And what can we expect from the first major trial against an opioid manufacturer going on now? My guest today is Regina LaBelle. She's a program director at the O'Neill Institute for National and Global Health Law at Georgetown University. She focuses on the opioid epidemic and addiction policies. So here's my conversation about the opioid crisis with Regina LaBelle. Hi, Regina. Thanks so much for coming on The Newsworthy.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I want to make sure that everybody's on the same page before we dig into the details a little bit. So first, what are opioids and why are they so addictive?
Opioids are chemicals that react with opioid receptors in the body. As prescription opioids, they are a very important medication that can help individuals, particularly with end-of-life care, but they react with the opioid receptors in the body and can also increase pleasure and reduce pain.
Can you give examples of what we're talking about and also how strong they are?
Sure. It's important that we distinguish opioid medications that are prescribed by physicians and other prescribers versus heroin. Heroin is also a form of opioid, and they come in various potencies. So fentanyl is a very potent pain reliever, but there are also illicit forms of fentanyl that can be bought over the dark web that often are purchased, sometimes mixed with heroin, and they make the heroin more potent and potentially more lethal for individuals.
When we hear about the opioid crisis, are we talking about both legal and illegal opioids?
The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention calls it 3 waves of the epidemic. The first wave was driven by prescription opioids, the second by heroin, and the third by fentanyl. We're increasingly seeing an increase in individuals who are overdosing because they are using heroin mixed with illicit fentanyl.
Where are we now? How bad is the problem?
Right now, we have the 2017 data, and we still have over 70,000 people in the United States annually who die from a drug overdose, primarily driven by opioids. Overdose deaths are horrible, and every single one of those individuals leaves behind someone. It affects someone in that community. And the communities that have seen these overdose deaths are also experiencing children who are being placed into foster care, costs to local systems. So it's not just that one overdose. The overdose itself is kind of the tip of the iceberg.
For the first time, some drug company executives, as well as some doctors and pharmacies, are now facing federal criminal charges. As we've talked about, there are also nearly 2,000 civil lawsuits against the drug companies from state, city, and county governments across the U.S. So why are we seeing all of this right now? And what are both sides saying about the companies and the doctors' role in creating the opioid epidemic?
It's kind of gone from the Drug Enforcement Administration and law enforcement in Florida cracking down on rogue pill mills in that state and other states, particularly in the Southeast. And now the attorneys general, states and cities are taking it on in a more systemic way. People were told that you can't get addicted if you take it as a doctor prescribes it, that there's a very low chance of addiction. In Massachusetts, there were some of the court documents that came out against Purdue showed kind of a very aggressive targeting of certain parts of the country where they knew that there would be more likely that doctors would prescribe a lot of opioids. And without kind of following best practices about questions to ask when you're prescribing to an individual, monitoring to make sure that the individual is not developing an opioid use disorder. So there are several different types of cases that are being brought, but against the manufacturers, it really comes down to the marketing efforts that were undertaken by these companies.
And what is the potential impact of taking it to court versus going after the pill mills as they did earlier?
Well, so the pill mills, you'd just be taking down that one certain clinic and addressing that one individual doctor or perhaps several doctors who were overprescribing. This is much more fundamental to a company's bottom line, and it goes after the company itself as opposed to one clinic.
Can you explain what the manufacturers and what some of these companies are saying?
What's their defense? Yeah, I mean, some of them are saying that you can't blame them for today's problem, that today people are dying from heroin overdoses or fentanyl overdoses, and they're not really responsible for that. Certainly, we should acknowledge that we have an addiction epidemic in this country. It's not just one drug. Many of the people who have opioid use disorders are polydrug users, meaning they use more than just opioids. They may drink, they may take other substances. But looking at the numbers and looking at when pain became the fifth vital sign, when there was more of a focus on treating pain, you can't ignore the increases in overdose deaths that began in the late 90s, early 2000s, and really were at least correlated, if not caused, by a lot of these marketing techniques. And as these cases are brought and more information comes out about the marketing techniques, I think it will become more and more apparent about the role that the pharmaceutical company marketing played in kind of lighting the match to the epidemic. But we can't ignore the fact that we expect in this country that people have to hit rock bottom and then they can get help, as opposed to screening people and identifying when someone might need help and getting them the tools that they need at an earlier stage of their condition, instead of waiting for it to get chronic when it's much harder to treat. So we are not out of the woods yet on the opioid epidemic. But most importantly, we have an addiction issue in this country that's going to take a lot of money and a lot of time to address because it's been ignored for so long.
And you can find a link to learn more about our guest and this topic in today's show notes, along with links to all the stories we talked about in this episode. Just go to thenewsworthy.com, click episodes, and find today's date. Thank you so much for listening, and as always, The Newsworthy is here for you by 4 in the morning every weekday. So we'll chat again tomorrow. Have a great day.